Shame, the silent killer. I've used shame in my life before by telling people they were a groomer or a jerk or some other vision of what it is that people can label others. This was my bounty at one point, to be open and honest about who I am. Okay? This is the nature of the struggle of coming to people and telling them that, correct? Most often it was not lobbed at them unless I was a child, right? I've done my fair share as an adult, but it's usually not into their eyes or to their faces. Okay, I've had my moments of discretionary judgment. You see, those words will ring true for many, understanding what that actually is. Okay? And so this idea that the process of utilizing shame can often hit its mark very correctly. That's what a lot of people do. They say, I utilize something that alters the behavior of those here who are not doing or being the way that I want them to be. Versus, you've done wrong by me and you deserve to feel guilty for what you've done. Okay, there's that difference between shame, which says that you are inherently flawed as a person in some way, shape, or form, or that you have taken on, it's like an identification tool. Okay, that's the quickest way you can identify shame, is by allowing others to then see it placed upon themselves and say, how does that feel for you? It's often related to who we are, not an action we've taken. Okay? And this is where Brenda says, oh my gosh, I've heard my share of it during this process. Because in essence, I fight for us to release the anger that many release, and do so utilizing those methods or tools that we've learned as children, often from those that we modeled ourselves after, perhaps, those that we look to for wisdom and comfort. These can be those souls that go through the process of religious institutional visions, where they say, I've been labeled something that is negative for me. Others will understand that in the process of religious institutions utilizing various words, they're meant to rise above it. So it's like the word of warning, correct? You are this just because you came to this plane. That's no longer viable for the majority of the people in the coming decades, okay? And it truly is. There will be a lot of people who will still utilize that idea, but the essence of it is that most people don't place it on their hearts as a negative. They just say, I came here less than who I am in the flesh, right? No, as a whole soul. But it's not about being flawed. It's about being disconnected from who we really are as souls. So this idea that I have to be a good girl in order to reach my soul is ridiculous. And there are many souls that know that. It depends on where you want to go, okay? So many of us are saying, oh, is this an attack on the slave state? No. That's another, it's like institutional vision of what love can be, right? Many of us have justified utilizing words of wisdom to hurt others in their minds. Now, what this is saying is, are you anything other than loved, adored, and cherished by your own soul? No, you're not. You don't get labeled anything other than beautiful and cherished and adored and loved by your own vision of love that comes to you from the highest levels. What others are going through in this vision of soul retrieval, perhaps, is this idea that I'm embodying lower aspects of who I am. And when you go through a process like I did, where then I decided to take my wisdom outside of my own vision and give it to others, that's when you start to see the discrepancies of those who are willing to come through as guides and those who want to come through as souls, hurting others, right? I don't get hurt by anybody for the most part. I have to align with the idea of my own soul loves me even as I breathe in the vision of love for all. I'm not here to, it's like there's a word that wants to come out. Decrepit old souls, right? I'm one of those visions that identified myself as an old soul. But through the process of understanding, my own soul understands that the nature of what old is has nothing to do with who I think I am when I'm reading other people's ideas of what that actually means, right? And the idea of someone being decrepit, it could be logically enhancing, right? It could be that there's some validity to that vision, right? Calling ourselves old is very highlighting to Brenda when she says what old means to others is not my experience of when I came to my soul. It's like a youthful presentation of who we are. So if I go around telling people they're bad or they're guilty, it's a very different idea, okay? Saying someone has placed a behavior in their vision that someone else is saying this was hurtful to somebody can be useful. We all know that Brenda is very much from a psychological background, getting her degree in psychology, and knows that shame works. It has its conditioned responses most often when it's used against her. You see, we had to test her for her reactions against certain stimuli to see if she could handle the truth of where she was with other souls at certain times in her life. That's how strong it was for her. She was torturing herself over visions of shame and guilt that she put herself through as a child and as a young adult. I did my own work. I basically took on the shame and the guilt for things that weren't even mine to take on. How many of us have been in that vision? And that's the killer, the silent killer, not knowing. I didn't realize I was shaming myself so much until I realized that I had to fight for everything and deny everyone their labels of love, right? It doesn't mean telling ourselves that we can't label ourselves anything. I label myself something that some people would say is ridiculous, right? It's known how soul vision is that idea that when I come into this idea of Smokey Robinson wants to come through and say she rocks it out of the park for all of us because as slaves we were told we weren't even human in essence. We were less than human. We weren't a full-bodied human. That's the kind of country we live in, where people are telling people who matter and are honored and wisdom granted to all of us from their hearts, saying she listens to the music of soul, but it's not as honored for her, correct? She's had to fight her way against the shame that others are trying to place on her by saying that she is somehow flawed in the vision of her own attributes that she presents herself with. How is it any different? And this is where some will rise in the beauty of, yes, I am loved, adored, cherished, no matter how I present myself in this world. Whether it be in the beauty of the color of my hair or my eyes or whatever shade of purple I may be in the alignment of spiritual enlightenment. How many of us say, I love the purple because it means I'm enlightened, right? No, this is the idea of like my auras are a certain color. And Brenda is very neutral in that idea of slave state. It is basically the vision of I guide myself to those who honor who I am. I go for the blows and say I know how to unwind a lot of the stuff that people are working with. But why do I do it? Because it kills us. The shame can kill is what is being honored. Because it attacks our immune system, our nervous system. Our wisdom is always within no matter what. But what we have to understand is that wisdom is fluctuating in the minds of many. I thought this was about releasing the shame and the guilt, not planting it in the minds of many. It's not. That's what we do. We release ourselves from the shame of who we are, and we say, I matter. You matter. And we all matter. Wherever you are, no matter where you are in your life, you matter. Whoever says this person doesn't, it's like cease and desist. There are people who are saying, oh my gosh, I wish I was with her soul so I could tell her my stories about what I went through and the pain and the guilt and the suffering that I went through on my own. And I needed that tool of discovery to lob at someone's soul. I was there. I know what it's like. But it's also something that on a soul level, it was received as, you're going to hear a lot of souls come through and say it's needed for a lot of kids to be told to be the good ones and not the bad ones. And that sends a message like nobody else to the visions of most who are here and have at least a little bit of a psychological understanding about what that kind of does, that kind of label does to us as children. And those who say, I'm immune to it as an adult, good luck with that one. It will bury itself in your subconscious most likely if it's done over and over and over. You hear those words lobbed at you unless you are like Teflon Don, right? That man has had more stuff lobbed at him than he can imagine. And is he able to completely brush it off? You better believe he is in his mind. But in essence, it is still there. He can't run from the insults that attack him and attack back. See, because if you were truly immune to that, you wouldn't even react to it. You would feel nothing if you were Teflon Don. And I'm telling you, Brenda has a beautiful expression in the form of an article with the vision of the soul of Donald Trump that is very enlightening, but very honest in the interpretation of who he is. You see, this isn't just about Smokey Robinson saying, I've got her back always because she's my heart. She goes to bat for everybody on the soul level who's hearing those words and saying, I can understand the behavioral choices that people are making from various levels of understanding and of love. Okay? His soul saying, I've got her back too because she doesn't destroy me in her mind. That's what people are trying to do when they go through the process of soul retrieval often. And Brenda's here to tell you, I did more of the vision of embodying aspects of my soul that are for me here rather than trying to reach out into the stratosphere of soul and bring back every single piece of information that ever came from my lips or situations that happened to me while I was on this plane. It's almost impossible to do. Not only that, those ideas are playing out in other versions and other realities. It's not about the lost soul, I can guarantee you that. So what does this have to do about shame? That's what most people are utilizing, right? When they're calling people names. I want you to feel so bad about who you are. No, you are not. You are misleading yourself thinking that you actually know what you're doing. Shame is a tool of recovery for most when they go through the process, right? It's not. You don't have to worry about it for the most part when you cross over because we're all so used to it at this point, right? How many tears from heaven come from those who've been belittled so much with that vision that they crossed over due to that vision in their own way, taking it in their own hands and saying, I can't handle that anymore. Okay? That's the silent killer. How many of us don't understand why people are doing what they're doing? Right? And that's the nature of enlightening ourselves to the idea of why don't we just focus on who we want to elevate versus who we want to demean? Who do we want to highlight? Who comes to us and says, I love you for who you are? That's where Brenda is. But she still hears words of comfort from her own soul because she highlights people that sometimes in their world are very much instrumental in the changes in which we are going to be seeing coming in the coming ages. These are ages of people coming, right? We're not talking about how old they are. We're talking about the centuries and the millennia that we've gone through, and we still utilize those tools of old to censor ourselves, correct? That can be another form of censorship. Many are saying, I have to let out the anger. And I do so by shaming those who've angered me. I tell them they're bad. No, a lot of time people are just getting out the energy. But do you know how many people are not willing to come to the table with the instrument of destruction is her own soul, to be honest. She knows how to unwind most of those visions of destruction that others are trying to place on her. So when someone comes to her and says, you are a blank, she often disregards it because she says, I don't identify with that as a soul. And that's what we would give you if you identify with it, right? It's often the people that are closest to us that matter. So it's when those loved ones come to us and say it, correct? Do you know how many people are belittled online by so many people that they don't even know? Think about the school children, right? We often tell them, oh, don't worry about it. You got to toughen up. You got to thicken your skin. Really? Do you know how many people don't realize how internalizing those ideas and those visions can be for just about anybody? It depends on where you are in your growth and your psychological influences that you've had growing up, whether or not you believe it, right? How many people start to believe it? You get told that you're bad long enough, you're going to start to believe it. Brenda would get told, you're badass. Excuse the language. Okay? I have my moments of it. Most often, I'm the tender-hearted soul that's trying to defend everybody from other people. Because in essence, I understand the nature of change from a different level of love. That says, I understand we all have our outburst of energy. We all have our negativity that we work with and on. And we also have the love to give. I love who I am. I hope you do too. I know you do. When I say I hope you do, this is where many would say that, knowing that Brenda's bringing forth wisdom about the nature of self-love that is so strong and inherently within us that we can't deny it. Yet most do not believe it because in essence they've been told their whole lives, either directly or indirectly, that there's something wrong with them or with their life or who they are. Okay? And it's like trying to deconstruct religious institutions' visions of what it is. This is why that one soul is like, I'm taking the soul's sins away from everybody. You don't need to worry about it. There's more to that vision to come in the future. Teflon Don is laughing. It's a characteristic trait of Donald Trump. Okay, and he's saying, as a soul, I love her as a soul worker because she aims her arrows of love at people who don't even know her. And she says, I love you for who you are. I just can't handle certain aspects that are so detrimental to the minds of many. But in effect, most are not doing so face to face. It's those face to face interactions that are truly detrimental. It doesn't matter. Brenda will say, I won't do that in essence to anybody. I'm very conscious of the nature of utilizing shame as a weapon. Others are using it as a defense mechanism, right? I'm utilizing this in self-defense. That's what some people will do. That's what the label was, and I had to change it to a behavioral aspect that someone was creating with and trying to prove that this behavior is not who they are, but a choice that they made. And it could be a pattern or a series of choices. But do you want to know how that relieves people? It relieves you of those identities that are not right for you, that don't feel good for you. So if someone is labeling you something, or you're labeling yourself, that's even more painful for those of us on the soul level. When we label ourselves something negative, thinking it's somehow going to encourage us to do better. How about we inspire ourselves to greatness, as we already are, right? It's whether or not we look at ourselves in the mirrors and say, I hate how I look, right? Or I hate how I'm projecting myself, or this is who I am, right? People will start to understand that this idea of who we are isn't anything for anyone else to cherish other than who we are, right? Or who I am. Many will say they cherish their loved ones, and yet they will utilize tactics of aggression on them. And that can be seen as detrimental. But it's about the idea of, if I'm shaming others or I'm shaming myself by taking on identities that are not mine to take on, I could be doing a disservice to my livelihood, to my life, right? To my liberty. We have a lot of freedoms here to speak our mind. But that's the nature of where people get a little bit ruffled, right? Their feathers get ruffled. I get to say whatever I want to say whenever I want to say it, for the most part. Sure you do. Sure you do. But your wisdom is being honored no matter what by your hearts. How many of us love to shame others, not realizing or absolutely realizing the damage it can do on a sociological level as well as a psychological level? Because once we start labeling people or groups things that are negative, it can have an impact on society as well. This is what we do, even to groups. We label various groups different things, and then those groups get battered for various reasons. Do you see how it's almost impossible not to see how society works its magic? This is why there are certain souls who are those, quote, I'm those light workers, right? A light worker, right? They come to lighten their load, right? Often they're labeling people things that are not inherently bad, but they might be pointing out the behavior that is highlighting the desire for a change. Brenda doesn't do that. For the most part, she's here to try to inspire people, but she does have to go through her own process of admitting guilt to various things, right? That's someone else's vision. I know exactly what I've done and to who. I went through this process where I was hearing from all these different people in my past, even in my childhood, about things that I did or said, and that vision came to me because those were defining moments perhaps for them. Okay? When you hurt somebody like that. Okay? When they have arrived on the soul level, it's a whole different ball game. We open up our hearts and we understand the nature of the conditioning that we've all received and what we've been told and what was said to us to get us into that position where we felt like it was a-okay just to be who we are. Right? So this isn't about saying this, there's a dictate saying don't do this or don't doing that, but it is truly an understanding of the negativity that we often see upon the screen that helps others in their vision of victory, of defeat, right? That's what others are doing. They're thinking that they're arriving at some place of victory for defeating others in those ways. Brenda had to have her hat handed to her a couple times by her soulmate, in essence, because he's like, I can't be belittled by you in the behavior in which I'm participating in. And it's not a belittlement. It's literally, this is what we don't want. Okay? We don't want this idea of tit for tat. Okay? People go back and forth with this idea, and some people get a rise out of it, and some people say, I've now won my case. Right? There are so many instances where people are saying, we're calling people horrible names in the criminal justice system, and then they realize what? They take it on, whether or not it's true. Right? How many people know we have innocents on this plane who have no idea what they're doing? Many souls are being called out, telling themselves, I was told I was horrible, bad, less than everyone else in my family or my friend group or the citizenry of the United States, perhaps, or now even the idea that there are certain countries that are seen as less than, these boundaries around our hearts that we place. We're in defensive mode when we go to that kind of vision, right? We want to be loved, adored, and cherished. Why can't we find a coming together of honesty about the differences that people utilize and say, it's not meant to shame others into not doing it. But who told us to go that route in the first place? Think carefully. Who told us that we were flawed, or less than, or bad? Did it stick? Why would we think it's somehow less than if those good old books of old are very much in that idea of it? Those vibrate out of the collective very soon as well, in essence, because they're going to see their vision shift dramatically in the coming decades. So this idea of something happening fast, it's not going to happen fast. It's over decades and decades. So this is why people are not believing it, because they look out into the state of the world and they say, no, we're all here and we're all clinging to these words of wisdom. The wisdom is there. How it's delivered is a whole different issue. Right? We had to do what we could in the moment we were in. That's what everyone says. So it's not about labeling others who have done so as anything bad either. It's a tool of aggression or a projection of fear most often that we utilize those tools. And anger has its vision. That's a different episode. Fear is at the base of it most often. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are we fearing, or who are we fearing and why? This will help unwind a lot of the visions of I'm being controlled by somebody else in my mind. Those words have stuck subconsciously in my soul, right? A lot of people still buy into that vision consciously, but those who are there saying, oh, I still have that. It feels like I've got that soul in my mind telling me there's something wrong with me. Now, what we would offer is the love and unconditional support from your hearts always, saying you don't have to buy into it. You challenge the message, and here's the best way to do so. Ask a simple question. Thank you very much to the soul of Byron Katie. But this is something that therapists would use as well. She just popularized that idea of it, which is asking yourself, is that true? And you sit with it. And then you say, did I tell myself that, or was that given to me by somebody else? Almost always. It could be something you took on internally due to the nature of society's vision, or it could have been something that someone planted for you, thinking that it was best for you as a child. We often know as adults, right, what's been planted for us, right, what we take on, right? We're choosing to go to different programs or whatnot. That's why Brenda's program is very unique, because it's not about who you aren't, right? It's about who you are, and that's a loving vision always. You're internally loving, no matter if you perceive it to be or not. Your worth is inherently there as well. There are questions you can ask yourself if you're feeling low about some experience that you're having. Okay? So this is why Brenda's fighting those who are trying to belittle others or take them down, when in essence, she says, I'm freeing them from aspects of who they thought they were. That's what she tries to do to help certain souls who've labeled themselves something negative. And if there's no bearing on their heart, even if they somehow did something that caused that vision, it's freed for them when they cross over. They take off the conditioning of this plane most often it's like there are certain souls that decide to stay in the ethereal realm that have a little bit of that conditioning left. But most often we go to this place of love and understanding for those visions, and we rejoice in our victory of coming back and reuniting as whole visions of love. But when we can do aspects of that here, it gives us an expression of soul that is wise, discerning, loving, careful in our attributes that we label either ourselves or others. So label yourself the beauty of who you are. Lay down the shame stick of soul, because that's not what this is about. We want people to know that even if you do that behavior, you're still loved and adored by your soul. But they will give you a different answer in a soul session if it's something that's being utilized to take others to their soul's redemption place. Others will find that as a place of redemption, right? It's not about saying I'm bad because I used it, okay? That's not what this is either, okay? But what we want you to do is inspire yourself to see the beauty where you can, and stop looking for those that you can't see the beauty in, okay? Because they're inherently beautiful as souls, as we all are. Whether or not you agree with that or not, it's the nature of who we are. And that's why others go, yes, I know, I am all that and more. Others are very much enlightened in who they are. And that's why they project that beauty and that wisdom and that guidance and that I love you too, right? Even those that don't like her, she understands them. That's her ticket into the paradise. She's like, I understand. If I were you, I would be seeing things the way that you do. I would be feeling the way that you do. I would be doing things the way that you do. But I still keep that vision of separateness enough that I don't have to be them. I don't have to do the things that they do. I don't have to experience the things that they do in order to empathize with them. That's the nature of empathy, right? It's way more complicated than that. Empathy is not just the neurons in the brain. There's more going on depending on what tools of enlightenment or systems or of information. Science is catching up with those on the spiritual planes because we're way ahead of them in certain areas. In other areas, science is right there with us wherever we are. It's not separate either. Okay? It just doesn't have all of the solutions for all the questions and the issues that we want to create. Okay? It's not a bad thing. We also like toys. So we create a lot of fun things with our science and technology and our understanding of the unknown. Okay? So with that, I want to say thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, or follow, depending on which format you're watching this in. And remember, always, stay curious, wise, and soulful. Have a wonderful day.